In this video, I'd like to talk about our two drill presses that we have in the shop. We have one drill press in the upper part of the shop that's meant for drilling wood and plexiglass. We have another drill press down in the lower part of the shop that's meant for drilling metal. A couple key differences. This drill press has a nicer table and a fence. It's also connected to the vacuum system, and it has this little safety guard on it. The older drill press down in the lower shop, which is meant for metal, is geared a little bit slower, which makes it better for drilling through steel, aluminum, brass, things like that. It also has a metal table with a vise attached, which you can remove. And it also has some cutting fluid nearby, and you'll see some residue of that because you always need to use oil or cutting fluid when you're drilling through metal. So let's take a look at this drill press first and get to know its parts a little bit. There are some features on this drill press that if you don't understand them, you could break them. First off, we have this little safety guard here. Whenever you need to change the bit in the drill press, go ahead and just flip it up. You can loosen the chuck, change the bit, tighten it back up. When you're all done, you can push that back in place. For this drill press, the on-off button is on the side here, and you pull it out to turn the drill on, you push it in to turn the drill off. This drill press only goes in one direction. There's no reverse like there is on a hand drill, so you don't need to worry about that. Now, once the drill is turned on and you're ready to drill your hole, you pull forward on the handle here, and that brings the drill bit down towards your workpiece. When you finish drilling, don't just let go and let it snap back, but let it slowly go back into position, and don't let go of that handle until the chuck has come all the way up to the rest position. Setup on this drill press is probably the trickiest thing and the most important thing to pay attention to. There are lots of different adjustments that can be made on this drill press. Probably the first step in using the drill press would be to choose a bit. Once you have the right bit, you can put it in the drill press by flipping the safety cover up, loosening the chuck with the chuck key, and then sliding the bit in place. You can then hand tighten the chuck and finish it off by tightening it with the chuck key. Make sure that you always put the chuck key back on the magnet on the right-hand side of the drill so that it doesn't get lost. After you have your drill bit in place, you're probably going to want to adjust the height of the table. To adjust the height of the table, you first reach around on the left-hand side and loosen the clamp bolt behind the table. Once that's loosened, you can then turn the crank on the right-hand side of the table until the table's at the right height. I tend to make it a little bit lower than it needs to be, put my piece in place, then I raise it up until I think that it's in a good location. Now be careful because on this drill, that crank spins very close to the work table, and you can pinch your fingers if you're not careful. Once you have this in place, make sure that you retighten the tightener bolt on the back left-hand side of the drill. Otherwise, the minute you go to work, the table's going to shift around. Now also please notice that when you loosen that, the table will spin. It will spin from side to side. So you have to be sure that you get this centered, not only its height, but you have it centered so that when you're drilling, if you drill all the way through your workpiece, the drill bit makes it into the pilot hole in the table. If you're using a drill bit that's bigger than that pilot hole in the center of the table, or if you're using a spade bit or a hole saw or something like that, please go ahead and put a piece of scrap wood underneath your workpiece so that you don't drill into this table. That little insert is removable and replaceable, but I'd rather not replace it if I didn't have to. Next, on this drill press, you can set the fence. Now, the fence has got a tricky adjustment to it. In the back, behind the ruler, there are two little levers. They actually act like wrenches. The first time you go to use this, you may think that you can't loosen or tighten it because it only goes so far. If you lift up on that lever, you can actually move it to another place on the screw to tighten or loosen it. It's a little tricky. Once you've done it a few times, you won't even think about it anymore. There is a ruler on the table on either side of your workpiece, and that allows you to make sure that the fence is perfectly straight. Now, what the fence is going to do is it's going to give you something to put your workpiece against so that when you start to drill through, it doesn't start to spin. It also allows you to drill multiple holes and always have the same distance from the center of the drill bit to the edge of the workpiece. This can be very useful if you're drilling lots of different holes and you want them to be all the same. It is possible to adjust the angle of this table relative to the floor as well. You just need a box wrench. There's an adjustment underneath the table here, and there's even an angle gauge to get the right measurement. Another adjustment to consider on this drill press is the depth gauge. If for some reason you did not want to drill all the way through your workpiece, possibly you're making a hole for a pin or a dowel or something like that, and you don't want the bit to come out the other side of the piece, you can use this gauge to make sure that your depth is exactly where it needs to be. Something you will notice on this drill press: the plate on the depth gauge is bent. The reason for this is somebody used this drill press with the two nuts all the way down, and it came in contact with that plate, and they felt resistance, and instead of stopping and figuring out what was wrong or coming and asking me, they just forced the handle and they bent that plate. Now the plate still works, but if ever you're using a tool and something doesn't seem quite right, you encounter resistance where you don't expect it, stop, turn the tool off, and come and talk to me, and I can explain to you what's wrong. And that way we don't have something that's bent or broken. One last thing that I'll mention about this drill press: it has a work stop similar to the miter saw downstairs. It is adjustable. It can be moved on either side of the drill bit. It flips down, and this is very useful if you were, say, always trying to drill a hole 3 inches from the end of a piece of wood, and you had lots of pieces to drill. Well, then you could set that work stop right at 3 inches, and every time you needed to drill something, you just put it up against that stop, and the hole would be right in the same spot every time. It flips up to flip out of the way if you needed to, say, drill something else in another position. The last thing you would want to do before you started using this drill press is turn on the vacuum system. It will draw your wood chips and dust away from what you're doing. It'll give you a cleaner hole, and it'll help you to see what you're doing. All right, so let's drill a few sample holes and see what the drill press is really good for. I've taken this piece of pine. It's 1.5 inch piece of pine, and I've marked a little cross at the halfway point, 3/4 of an inch in and 3/4 of an inch from the end. So I'm going to center up my drill bit right in that mark. But let's pretend that I'm going to make 20 of these and not just one. Well, then I'm going to set the drill press all up to be just in the right spot, and then I'm going to use the work stop so that I make sure that I only have to mark this once. Here we go. So first, I'm going to set the fence. And since my drill bit is so far from the piece of wood, I'm going to go ahead and set the height right now too. I want the bit to be maybe 1/4 inch above the piece of wood. So that looks like a good height. Now I've loosened these in the back. I'm going to just bring the fence forward, and that looks pretty good. Bump it around a little bit. Right there. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check my measurement marks here and see that my fence is straight. If the fence isn't straight and I go running a bunch of different boards through there, eventually it will go crooked. All right, it's still in the right spot. The fence is straight. Now I'm going to tighten these, and remember they ratchet. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set my work stop. Just in the right spot. All right, now that that's all set up, I can turn on the vacuum and I can go ahead and drill my holes. Okay, I ran into an interesting problem there, which is that the safety guard is bumping the fence. And maybe you can see that. So rather than force that, I'm going to go ahead and lift this up. Sometimes that might be necessary if you're doing very small work. And this is an instance where I'm going to go ahead and utilize this with the safety guard up. I don't have my ring on, I don't have long hair or anything that could get caught in the drill, so I feel safe. So let's try this again. And hopefully you noticed in there that the vacuum was drilling all of the little bits of wood. The vacuum was pulling all of the little bits of wood right out of the hole as I drilled. So it keeps it nice and clean and you can see what you're doing. So I could go ahead and drill 10 more of those pieces. My work stop is set up so that each hole will be in exactly the same spot on each side of the board. Down in the metal shop, we have this other drill press that's meant for drilling holes in metal, steel, brass, aluminum. You'll notice that there's a vise on the table and it's just attached with a few clamps. So if you ever needed to take that off, all you have to do is loosen these two C-clamps. You can take the vise right off of there. However, I recommend that anytime you drill any kind of holes in metal, you have some sort of clamp or vise to hold your workpiece in place. Don't try to hold it by hand. You may think that you can just slip a piece of plywood under there and hold the piece of metal in place and go ahead and drill your hole. Problem is, what tends to happen is right at the last minute when the drill bit is making the final part of the hole, it sometimes will grab the metal and it'll spin it. And that can really cut up the ends of your fingers. So I recommend that you don't try to hold a metal workpiece in place when you're drilling holes, even with gloves. You tear right through the gloves. So this drill press is a little different in a few ways. For one thing, it's geared slower, like I said before. The on-off switch is on the front here. It's the same looking switch. It's the same type of switch with the little yellow plastic. You just pull it out to turn the drill press on, push it in to turn it off. This drill press also has a work light. Okay, let's drill a sample hole and I'll show you what it looks like to drill some holes in a piece of steel. Okay, so I'm gonna drill a hole in this piece of square stock here, square tube. And I'm going to go ahead and put that all the way down on the bottom of the vise so it's touching the plate of the vise, because when I start drilling it's probably going to push it anyway. And this drill bit is really thick. You would never, even if we wanted to drill a hole this size, you wouldn't want to start with a drill bit that size in a piece of steel. So what you can do is take this out and start with a smaller bit. So I'm going to go ahead and do this bit. And again, you can hand tighten the chuck and then use the chuck key to snug it up. And then put that back on the magnet on the side there. Now, I'm a little bit far from my workpiece. It probably will still reach, but I'm going to go ahead and just adjust the table up. And all of the controls are in about the same spot. I'm going to get it right above there. That looks pretty good. Now I'm a little off center, And so what I'm gonna do is loosen the C-clamps that are holding the vise to the table and just move my vise back a little until I'm centered up on that piece of square stock. All right, I'm just about ready to drill my hole. I've got a good position and my depth gauge is set high enough. And the last thing I'm gonna do is just put a little squirt of oil right where the bit is gonna go. You just need a little bit, not a lot. There's also cutting fluid down here in little aerosol cans. You can use that as well. Now watch how much more slowly this bit turns in the drill press upstairs. And then you're gonna go nice and slow. And you'll see the little curlicues of steel come through, and there we go. We've already cut all the way through it. So let's move up to that bigger bit now. I don't want to move anything else if I can help it, because I know that I'm centered. So now I'm going to switch to a little bit larger bit. I think this was the one. Now, one problem is I'm going to have to adjust the table down to fit that bit in place. So I can center it back up again, no problem. Snug that up. I'm gonna come up a little bit and then test my hole. Looks like I'm about in the middle there. That looks pretty good. I'll tighten up the bolt on the table height adjustment, and I think I probably still have enough oil. This time, what I might do is just put a little bit of cutting oil on the tip of the drill bit, since it's a bigger bit. And I'm ready to go again. Nice and slow. Piece of cake. There we go. Pretty nice clean hole. The drill presses are a great example of a tool that you shouldn't assume you know how to use. They seem simple, but there are lots of things that can go wrong. They can be dangerous, and it's easy to break something. So if you forget any part of this video, or if you go to use a drill press for the first time and you just don't feel comfortable, again, please come and talk to me. It's my job to help you. I want to make sure you stay safe and that the tools don't get broken.